You're listening to Dark Rain Chronicles. The rain hides many things, but it also remembers. Secrets washed away, voices swallowed by the storm. These are the stories it brings back, and tonight, you will hear them. A tremor ran up my spine the day my fingers first brushed against the aged leather of that book. An odor unlike any other rose from its pages, not the familiar dry dust of antiquity I knew so well from years of collecting, but something damper, subterranean, like cardboard forgotten in a flooded cellar. It coiled in my nostrils, sharp enough to make my eyes water. The cover, a swathe of cracked, indeterminate brown that might once have been black, bore no title, only a network of faint scars across its surface. Why this particular volume, nestled among others in a rough-hewn wooden crate, seized my attention, I cannot say. I only recall the subtle vibration in my hands as I parted the first few leaves. That instant marked the genesis of a sequence of aberrations that would fray the edges of my reality. Belief in curses or spectral infestations isn't my inclination, yet this singular object radiated a disquiet, a palpable weight, as if unseen eyes watched, unseen breath warmed my neck whenever I dared touch it. My name is Silas. Books found their way to me through an inheritance, a sizable collection bequeathed by a remote relative, whose existence was a mere footnote in my memory until a solicitor's telephone call. A crate of rare volumes, the lawyer had explained, belonged to this obscure great-uncle. I retrieved it from his city office one muted afternoon, wrestling its considerable bulk into the back of my car. My house sits somewhat apart, near the town's periphery, offering ample sanctuary for my bibliophilic hoard. Shelves climb the attic walls like ivy, and the corridor is a canyon lined with aged spines. Order has always been my solace, a meticulous arrangement I took quiet pride in. This equilibrium fractured upon introducing the contents of that crate. The crate itself was unremarkable, stained planking, a few loosened nails. Within lay perhaps 20 books, most showing the ravages of time, jackets veiled in grime, pages absent or torn, peculiar marginalia scrawled in faded ink, and then the untitled leather tome. It was denser than its companions, heavier, its corners fortified with protectors of dulled steel or perhaps bronze. Lifting it required unexpected effort. I settled it upon my desk, easing open the cover. The pages, brittle as autumn leaves, exhaled that scent of damp earth mingled with the faint sweetness of decay found in neglected libraries. Immediately, my gaze fell upon disturbing illustrations, creatures of impossible anatomy, some with limbs stretched into nightmarish lengths, others possessing faces smoothed into terrifying blanks. The line work was stark, the ink faded but potent, a bestiary from darker ages perhaps. Yet the initial leaves offered no legible script, only glyphs and symbols that defied interpretation. As I turned more pages, a constriction tightened in my chest, a sensation akin to being unable to draw full breath. A faint susurrus whispered nearby, dismissing it as the pages settling, or maybe a draft from the window, felt logical, until I noted the window was firmly shut, the study air stagnant and close. Fatigue, I reasoned, dulling my senses. Closing the volume, I relegated it to a separate shelf, distanced from my curated sections, and tried to read no further that day. Over the ensuing days, while I cataloged the remaining acquisitions, mostly standard antiquarian fare, nothing extraordinary, my awareness kept snagging on the anomalous book. Each passage past its shelf drew my eyes to the blank, worn spine. The insomnia began roughly 3 nights after the crate's arrival. I surfaced from sleep into profound darkness, gripped by an unnerving certainty of being observed. My mouth was parched. Descending for water, I perceived a thin blade of light slicing the darkness from beneath my study door. A light I never left burning. My heart commenced a frantic rhythm against my ribs. My breathing grew shallow. I eased the door inward, half braced for an intruder. The room stood empty, the overhead fixture dormant. The illumination emanated from a small desk lamp, one rarely employed, its beam now aimed with unerring precision at the leather-bound book resting upon the desk. I stood transfixed, staring, as an icy current traced its path down my arms. I switched off the lamp and retreated hastily to my bed, the frantic thrumming of my pulse audible in the hollow of my neck. Morning brought the struggle for rational explanation. Perhaps a lapse in memory, an accidental flick of the switch forgotten. Dread curdled in my stomach as I lingered over coffee, postponing the inevitable return to the study. When I finally compelled myself to enter, the book lay open on the desk. Confusion warred with rising fear. I distinctly recalled closing it, shelving it. Approaching, I saw a page filled with fresh sketches, robed figures arranged in a circle, their postures unnerving. The dryness returned to my mouth. I snapped the book shut, pressing my palms flat on the cool wood of the desk to steady myself. A memory glitch, I insisted internally. A simple mistake born of distraction. I slid the heavy volume into a desk drawer, turned the key in the lock, and deposited the key amongst the clutter of my desk organizer. The day unfolded with routine errands, posting a parcel of old journals, a necessary stop for groceries. Yet the book shadowed my thoughts. A persistent tension knotted my insides, and I noticed perspiration prickling beneath my clothes, despite the mild air. Calm down, I chided myself. It's just an unsettling old artifact. Returning home in the late afternoon, I went directly to the study. The drawer remained locked. A small wave of relief washed over me. Unlocking it, I found the book exactly as I'd left it, closed. Exhaling, I felt a flush of embarrassment at my own paranoia. I left it entombed in the drawer and proceeded to prepare my evening meal. Later, while reading in bed, a sound drifted from upstairs, pages turning, yet amplified, louder than mere paper shifting. I lowered my novel, listening intently. My house, old and timbered, possessed its own orchestra of groans and clicks. Floorboards settled, pipes clanked. But this was different. A distinct, soft rustle, a pause, then another rustle. The frantic drumming resumed in my chest. The air vents, perhaps, or rodents. When the sound persisted, rhythmic and deliberate, I rose, slid my feet into slippers, and moved into the hallway. The rustling grew more defined as I neared the staircase. My legs felt leaden ascending the steps. I activated the hallway light, its sudden glare harsh, and advanced cautiously toward the study door. It stood slightly ajar. The rustling continued from within. With trembling fingertips, I pushed the door fully open. The desk lamp glowed again, and there, centered on the desk, lay the book, its pages flipping autonomously, one after another, in the still, draft-free air. I froze, my mind scrambling for logic, finding none. Then abruptly, the pages ceased their movement. Silence descended, broken only by the ragged sound of my own breathing. Nausea surged, leaving a sour taste in my mouth. Forcing myself forward, I placed a hand flat upon the open book, halting any further motion. The paper felt unnaturally cold beneath my palm, despite the room's warmth. Slowly, deliberately, I closed the volume, my hands shaking so violently I had to clench the thick covers. I switched off the lamp and backed out of the room, refusing to turn my gaze away from the doorway. As I retreated downstairs, a faint creak echoed from behind me. I didn't look back. The remainder of the night was spent on the living room sofa, the television murmuring softly, a bulwark against the suffocating quiet. Morning found me stiff-necked, a dull ache pulsing behind my eyes, my lower back protesting its night on the couch. I dragged myself to the kitchen, seeking the solace of coffee. Apprehension coiled within me at the thought of revisiting the study, yet avoidance felt like surrender. Around 9, I climbed the stairs once more. The study door remained open, the lamp extinguished. The book rested on the desk, closed. A powerful urge to destroy it warred with a stubborn academic need to comprehend. I lifted it, the leather cool against my sweating palms. Flipping through a few pages, feeling them adhere slightly, I encountered more bizarre illustrations. The unsettling creatures, the ubiquitous hooded figures in varying poses, arms raised in supplication, or seeming to gaze directly out from the page. Each encounter with those shrouded forms sent a prickling sensation across the nape of my neck. The marginalia remained an indecipherable script, alien characters or symbols mocking my attempts at understanding. I slammed the book shut with sudden force. My next strategy was banishment to the attic. Fetching a heavy-duty plastic sack from the kitchen, I encased the book, sealing it tightly. The narrow attic stairs seemed steeper than usual. Each step was an effort, my arms feeling strangely weak. Locating an old steamer trunk used for storing miscellany, I unlocked its tarnished clasp, thrust the bagged volume inside amongst forgotten linens and discarded trinkets, and secured the lock once more. Enough, I told myself. Descending, I attempted to immerse myself in normalcy, cleaning, dusting familiar shelves, sorting vinyl records. But my gaze kept drifting ceilingward, an invisible tether pulling my attention toward the attic, a persistent unease settling deep within me. Sleep remained elusive that night. Around midnight, a new sound emanated from above. Not pages turning this time, but something softer, heavier, like footsteps muffled by dust, or perhaps the drag of thick fabric across floorboards. My heart leapt, pounding against my ribs with painful intensity. Leaving the bed, I fumbled for a flashlight. The house was utterly dark. Every instinct screamed against ascending, yet the sounds could not be ignored. I crept upward, each stair groaning under my weight, my throat constricted and dry. Reaching the attic door, I hesitated. The noise had ceased. My hand, trembling, closed around the cold metal doorknob. I turned it slowly, peering into absolute blackness. The flashlight beam sliced through the dust-laden air, illuminating stacked boxes and skeletal shelves casting long, dancing shadows. The trunk sat in its corner, undisturbed, lock gleaming dully. I advanced cautiously, the floorboards protesting my intrusion. Kneeling before the trunk, I verified the lock, secure. The book remained imprisoned within. Yet, the musty odor, that signature scent of damp decay, seemed stronger here, almost tangible. As I rose, a prickling sensation crawled up my neck. The awareness of presence. I whirled, the flashlight beam slashing through the gloom. For a heartbeat, a silhouette coalesced in the far corner, near a leaning tower of old crates. Tall, draped in shadow that resolved into the suggestion of a deep hood. My breath hitched. My legs turned traitor. I stumbled backward, colliding with a small, empty box that clattered loudly. In that instant, the shape dissolved, melting back into the stacked detritus. A strangled gasp escaped me. Retreating, the flashlight quivering in my grip like a captured bird. I heard nothing but the frantic percussion of my own blood. I slammed the attic door shut, the sound echoing in the sudden silence, and scrambled downstairs. Locking myself inside my bedroom, I leaned heavily against the door, slick with cold sweat, feeling dizzy and faint. Pins and needles prickled my arms. Eventually, I crawled onto the bed, staring wide-eyed at the ceiling, straining to hear any further sound. Silence reigned, but sleep was a forgotten country. The following morning, fueled by desperation and caffeine, I turned to research. Hours evaporated in front of the computer screen, searching archives, digital libraries, forums dedicated to obscure texts, seeking any mention, any image that resonated with the book's symbols or nightmarish illustrations. Nothing. My head throbbed. A perverse curiosity urged me to retrieve the book, to scrutinize it further, but a deeper, primal instinct screamed caution. The hooded figure, a trick of light, a shadow born of fear, remained vividly imprinted on my mind's eye, refusing dismissal. In the days that followed, the subtle disturbances became my unwelcome companions. The faint rustle of pages turning at incongruous hours, creaks and whispers that seemed to track my movements through the house. Fleeting glimpses of that hooded darkness at the edge of my vision. A flicker, instantly gone when I turned. My stress became a physical entity, a constant pressure behind my ribs. My appetite vanished. Simple tasks became monumental efforts. Once, preparing coffee, I dropped the mug, shattering it, convinced I'd seen the figure reflected momentarily in the dark glass of the kitchen window. My hands, I noticed with detachment, had developed a permanent tremor. After nearly a week besieged within my own home, I resolved to move the trunk. Perhaps greater distance would dilute the influence. Dragging the heavy trunk down from the attic during the relative calm of late afternoon felt like wrestling with a corpse. I hauled it out to the detached garage, depositing it in a dusty corner beneath cobwebs. Locking the garage door securely from the inside felt like a small victory. Back in the house, I played loud music, sorted through stacks of newspapers, desperately trying to reconstruct a semblance of ordinary life, ignoring the persistent knot of dread tightening in my gut. That night, the stench woke me, mold, thick and suffocating, so potent it made me gag. It emanated from my bedroom doorway. The hallway beyond lay shrouded in darkness. Scrambling from bed, I fumbled for the light switch, heart hammering. The sudden glare revealed them, footprints marring the polished floorboards, damp, gray outlines leading from the direction of the stairs, terminating just outside my room. Each print was vaguely man-shaped but too large, blurred at the heel. as if left by something sodden and misshapen. My breath caught. Listening intently, I heard only the frantic thrum of my own pulse. Following the ghastly trail back towards the staircase, I found the prints simply ceased at the top step, vanishing into nothing. Dizziness washed over me. My chest felt banded with iron. Sweat trickled down my temples. I possess no satisfactory explanation for these occurrences. The book remains sequestered in its trunk within the garage. The thought of opening it again triggers a visceral wave of nausea. The illustrations, those hooded sentinels, are burned into my memory, stirring a cold dread whenever they surface. I perceive fleeting movements in the periphery, dark shapes that dissolve upon direct observation. The phantom rustling of pages persists, a nocturnal torment. I sense unseen motion in the shadowed corners of my own home. Temporary escapes, afternoons spent in bustling coffee shops, or the quiet anonymity of the public library, provide only brief respite. This is my house. I refuse to be driven out by a malevolent artifact. Yet I am adrift, uncertain how to reclaim my sanctuary. Now, lights burn late into the night throughout the house. The study door remains locked, though I rarely venture inside. Sleep offers little refuge, fragmented by sudden awakenings, my eyes scanning the familiar darkness for any anomaly. The notion of burning the book arises, tempting and terrifying, choked by the fear that destruction might unleash something worse. Consulting an expert in antiquarian texts crosses my mind, but how to articulate the encroaching madness without sounding utterly unhinged? For now, existence is reduced to enduring, day by day, struggling to maintain composure. The sounds have not ceased. The shape at the edge of my vision manifests with increasing frequency. Each time, my heart surges, breath catching, until the certainty of solitude tentatively returns. This is my life now, a state of perpetual tension, forever listening for the next soft whisper of pages, turning in an otherwise empty room. That distant diner sign, a smear of weak neon bleeding into the highway's oppressive dark, hummed like a faulty promise. Hours I'd wrestled the wheel, the asphalt ribbon spooling endlessly, stinging my eyes raw. As my sedan crunched onto the gravel of the near-deserted lot, a lone shape detached itself from the roadside gloom, thumb stark against the night. Some instinct screamed caution, yet I braked anyway. A decision, simple as drawing breath, that would unravel the world I knew. I idled beside the hitchhiker. He materialized under the weak security light, all sharp angles and hollows, clad in clothes that remembered better times, a beard like neglected brambles. The window slid down, admitting a miasma of old sweat and the phantom bitterness of countless cigarettes. Destination. The word felt too formal, too loud in the quiet. His gaze flickered, skittish as a cornered animal, before landing on me. Just further. Name's Reese. A dissonant chord struck somewhere deep inside me, a warning bell muffled by fatigue. Still, the desolation out here clawed at something decent. Leaving him felt wrong. All right, get in. The lock clicked open. I'm Silas. Reese folded himself into the passenger seat, a worn backpack hugged fiercely to his chest. Pulling back onto the tarmac, the smooth glide of the car felt alien after the stop. I caught the tremor in his hands. Everything all right? My voice, aiming for casual, missed the mark. A jerky nod. Yeah, fine. Just the chill, you know. Unconvincing. Utterly. But the silence that followed was heavier, thick with unspoken things. Miles dissolved under the tires, each one amplifying the tension coiling in the small space. Picking him up suddenly felt like a monumental error. So, I ventured, the quiet becoming unbearable. What has you traveling this particular nowhere in the dead of night? His entire frame went rigid. Running, he clipped out. Just away. Away from... No answer. Only the drumming of his fingers against the backpack. An erratic, frantic rhythm against the engine's drone. He kept glancing at the rearview mirror, a hawk searching for pursuit. The landscape blurred past, monotonous and menacing. I was formulating an excuse to drop him at the next desolate crossroads, when his voice, thin and strained, broke the silence. You have to help me. A whisper, barely audible. They're coming for me. Ice traced a path down my spine. Who? Reese's eyes were wide, reflecting the dashboard lights like pools of fear. The ones I borrowed from. It wasn't supposed to be like this. Desperate times, you understand. But they know. They want me gone. My knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. Borrowed. What? He eased the backpack's zipper open a fraction. Just enough. Bundles of currency. The glint of gold and gemstones. My pulse hammered against my ribs. Sweet mother, I breathed. You brought that heat into my car. Sorry, man, so sorry, Reese stammered, words tumbling over each other. Nowhere else. No one. You've got to get me clear. As if summoned, twin beams flared in the rear view, swelling with predatory speed. Oh no, 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 Reese moaned, a low thrum of terror. That's them. They found us. Instinct slammed my foot down. The engine whined in protest. What madness had I invited in? The lights behind us burned brighter, resolving into the blunt snout of a large SUV, closing fast. Who are these people, Reese? I yelled, wrestling the car through a curve. Bad, he whimpered. The kind of bad that erases problems permanently. It was on us now, its high beams blinding, flooding the cabin with harsh, interrogating light. Two silhouettes occupied the front seats, featureless threats. Then, a brutal impact from behind. Metal shrieked. We fishtailed violently across the lane, tires screaming. Reese was yelling now, incoherent sounds torn from his throat, clutching the backpack like a shield. What in God's name do they want? I shouted, wrenching the wheel, regaining a semblance of control. Everything, Reese said, his voice suddenly hollow, devoid of hope. The cash, the jewels, me. Another collision, harder this time. I felt the rear crumple. Outrunning them was a fantasy. Ahead, a dark slash in the trees, a turnoff, unpaved. plunging into woods. Impulse took over. I yanked the wheel right. The car bucked, then plunged down the dirt track, branches whipping the windshield like angry claws, deeper into the black forest. The SUV, impossibly large, crashed in behind us, snapping limbs. My old sedan groaned, pushed past its limits. I prayed it wouldn't die here. Car's a beacon, I grunted, mind racing. Need to ditch it, go on foot. Reese nodded, face a pale mask in the fleeting moonlight filtering through the canopy. A small clearing materialized ahead. I steered towards it, killing the lights. We skidded into the open space in a spray of dirt and dead leaves. The moment we stopped, I was out, hauling Reese by the arm. Move, I hissed, dragging him towards the tangled undergrowth bordering the clearing. We crashed into the darkness. Briars tore at clothes. Unseen roots snagged at our feet. Behind us, the relentless sound of the SUV smashing through the woods, drawing nearer. We ran until our lungs burned, until the sounds of pursuit faded slightly behind the frantic pounding in my ears. Just as my legs threatened to buckle, an old structure loomed out of the gloom, an abandoned barn. Here! I gasped, wrenching at the warped wooden door. Inside, absolute blackness. The air hung thick with the scent of ancient hay, decay, and coal rust. We stumbled blindly towards a far corner, collapsing against the rough-hewn wall, gulping air, trying to muffle the ragged sound of our breathing. Time stretched, measured in the frantic thumping of my own heart. Every creak of the ancient timbers, every rustle outside, was a fresh jolt of terror. What have I done? Silas. I'm sorry, Reese whispered beside me, the sound swallowed by the dark. Never wanted this. Any of it. Anger, sharp and sudden, pierced through the fear. What is this? Reese. The whole story. I think I've earned that much. A long silence, then a heavy sigh. Worked for them. The ones hunting us. Outfit. Big time. I was nobody, yeah. Errands, deliveries, ignored things. But then I saw things you can't unsee. A deeper chill settled over me. Like what? Killing, he breathed, the word barely there. Making people hurt. Monsters, Silas. Every last one. Couldn't stomach it. Had to get out. But they don't let people walk away, not knowing what I know. So I took insurance. Money, yeah. Jewels. But also papers. Ledgers. Proof. Nausea churned in my gut. And now they're hunting us both. He nodded, the movement inferred in the darkness. Deeply sorry. Didn't mean to pull you into my grave. Before a response could form, a brilliant beam of light sliced through the barn's darkness, pinning motes of dust in its glare. We froze, breath trapped in our chest. We know you're in there. A coarse voice boomed from outside. Come on out. Maybe the driver walks away clean. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat surely audible outside. Reese trembled beside me, his breathing shallow, panicked. What do we do? I whispered, the sound scratching my throat. His hand found mine in the blackness. Something was pressed into my palm, a thick envelope, the documents. "Take these," he urged, his whisper fierce. "Police. Only way. Stop them." Before I could react, before I could argue, he was standing. "I'm here," he called out, his voice astonishingly clear, steady. "Let him go. He knows nothing." "Reese!" "No," I hissed, grabbing for him, but he was already moving towards the light. The beam found him, centered on him. Footsteps crunched outside, approaching fast. Multiple sets. "Run, Silas," Reese said, his back to me. "Get those papers out. Make it mean something." My mind screamed protest, urged me to pull him back, to hide deeper in the shadows. But the cold weight of the envelope in my hand, the finality in his voice. He was right. This was bigger now. As the footsteps reached the barn door, I melted backwards, silent as smoke, seeking the rear wall. My fingers found splintered wood, a loose board. I pried it open, squeezed through the narrow gap. The cool night air was a shock against my skin. Behind me, angry voices erupted. Then, sharp and definitive. A single gunshot cracked through the night, its echo swallowed by the trees. I ran. Legs pumping, lungs searing. I fled, putting distance between myself and the barn, the gunshot, the man named Reese. The darkness began to thin, bruised with the first hints of dawn, as I stumbled onto the asphalt edge of a sleeping town. My hand shook as I pulled out the envelope. Names, dates, transactions, photographs. A catalog of horrors that chilled me to the bone. I knew the path forward. For Reese. For myself. For the unseen victims documented in these pages. Walking towards the square brick building marked police, the papers felt impossibly heavy. A burden and a purpose. A simple offer of a ride, a moment's decision on a desolate highway, had irrevocably altered the trajectory of my life. The night had been a descent into nightmare. Yet, as the pale dawn light touched the town, I felt not just exhaustion, but a nascent, unfamiliar resolve. Pushing open the heavy glass door, I stepped inside, knowing this wasn't an ending, but the start of something far larger, far more dangerous. Sleep, that fickle phantom, refused my company again. So, Elias found himself adrift on the porch near 2 in the morning, the night air a cool balm he hoped might coax slumber. Beyond the railing, the familiar ranks of backyard trees stood like skeletal fingers against a bruised sky. At first, tranquility settled, a welcome hush in the deep hours. Then, a disruption. Behind the slender, shadowed trunks, something moved. A shape, vaguely human, yet possessed of an unsettling velocity. A jolt, sharp and electric, surged through his chest. His heart hammered a frantic rhythm against his sternum. A primal urge screamed retreat, lock the door, burrow under covers. Yet, a contrary impulse, insistent and chillingly curious, compelled him closer. His home was unassuming, a modest structure anchored by a respectable plot of land, hemmed on 3 sides by a sturdy embrace of timber fencing, and terminated at the rear by a high, impassive rampart of brick. The porch, slightly elevated, offered a decent overlook of this domain, a space Elias often occupied during restless vigils. Usually, the night yielded nothing more dramatic than a prowling feline or the shuffling passage of a possum. This, however, was leagues removed from the mundane. The shadow seemed upright, hunched, perhaps, like a person scuttling low. Features remained elusive, obscured by distance, and the moon's weak diffusion, just a silhouette sketched against the deeper darkness. He rose, the worn wood of his chair sighing beneath him. From its perch on a small table near the door, he retrieved his flashlight, its cool metal a grounding weight. Descending the porch steps, each tread released a resonant creak that seemed to shatter the profound stillness. The air hung heavy, damp, slicking his palms against the flashlight's casing. He thumbed it on, casting a bright, searching cone across the lawn. Initially, the beam revealed only familiar textures, blades of dew-kissed grass, scattered twigs, the pale gleam of stones near the old, leaning shed. His own breathing sounded unnaturally loud, quickening despite his efforts to control it. Forcing slow, deliberate steps onto the lawn itself, he swept the light left, then right, his footfalls muffled by the turf. A chill seeped through his thin shirt, raising goose flesh along his arms. He fought to keep the beam steady, but a tremor betrayed the tension coiling in his wrist. Then, a sound, sharp, definitive, the snap of a branch, brittle and dry, originating somewhere near the back boundary. He flinched, startled, his pulse leaping into his ears. He pivoted, aiming the light toward the disturbance, and began to advance. Fallen leaves rustled and crushed underfoot, a sound he tried desperately to minimize. No words escaped him. Instinct warned against announcing his presence. Closer to the tree line, the air grew thick with the scent of damp wood and rich earth. The night was utterly windless, rendering every minute sound stark and clear. Another faint snap echoed, closer this time, suggestive of movement through undergrowth. Lifting the flashlight higher, he painted the tree trunks with light. Nothing stirred. The illuminated circle on the ground was starkly defined, bordered by an impenetrable wall of blackness beyond. He felt the muscles in his neck and shoulders bunch, realizing belatedly he'd been holding his breath. Scanning for several tense seconds yielded nothing. He stepped between two of the larger trees, their bark rough against the edge of the light. His gaze dropped, searching the ground. A patchwork of sparse grass and bare earth. There, captured in the beam, was a set of footprints, bare feet, unmistakably human in shape, with defined toes, and the clear impression of a heel, starkly fresh in the yielding, moist soil. Elias knelt, his knees sinking into the cold dampness, bringing the light closer. Each print was substantial, perhaps the size of a man's foot, 10 or 11 inches long. They tracked towards the formidable brick wall at the yard's end, but something felt anomalous. Their depth seemed excessive, as if imprinted by unusual weight or a deliberate, forceful pressure. He straightened, a cold knot tightening in his gut, and began to follow the trail. With every step, the tension mounted, a physical pressure in his chest. He fought to keep his thoughts linear, focused on the tangible evidence before him, but his mind skittered wildly. A barefoot intruder, skulking through his yard in the dead of night. Why? The prints led him inexorably nearer the wall. The grass grew thicker here, momentarily obscuring the path, but then another clear impression appeared, right at the base of the brickwork. And then, nothing. The trail simply ceased. No further marks led away. It was as if the figure had ascended the wall or vaulted it in a single, impossible movement. He stood frozen, playing the flashlight beam up the sheer brick face. It rose at least 8 feet, possibly more, smooth and unyielding. No ladder leaned against it. No accommodating tree limb offered purchase. His eyes traced the mortar lines, searching futilely for any conceivable handhold or foothold. The surface offered nothing. A profound unease settled over him, his stomach churning, his face flushing hot despite the night's coolness. The need to know, to see if tracks continued on the other side, warred with a potent sense of risk. His small stepladder resided in the shed, but retrieving it felt fraught. The distance, the noise of the lock, the vulnerability of setting it up in the darkness. Yet, the mystery gnawed at him. Fear and curiosity wrestled for dominance. Finally, the latter won a tentative victory. He turned and jogged back toward the shed, the flashlight beam bouncing erratically ahead. The night remained preternaturally quiet, save for the scuff of his shoes and his own ragged breathing. Reaching the shed, tucked near the yard's left flank, he wrenched the protesting door open. The scent of dust and old paint filled his nostrils. The ladder stood in the corner. Grabbing it, he nearly sent a small rake clattering. His pulse thrummed. His mouth felt parched. A reflexive glance over his shoulder revealed only familiar shadows and the dark bulk of the house. He carried the ladder back towards the wall, striving for silence. Propping it against the bricks, he tested its stability. A slight wobble, but seemingly adequate if he proceeded with caution. Placing the flashlight on the ground, angled upwards to illuminate the rungs, he began to climb. His legs felt stiff, his hands clamped tightly onto each step. The metal groaned softly under his weight. As his head neared the summit, he switched off the light, hoping the darkness might grant his eyes better acuity. He peered over the precipice. Beyond lay a narrow, neglected strip of land belonging to his neighbor, choked with tall grasses and dotted with indistinct piles of debris. No dwelling stood directly behind the wall, just this forgotten parcel leading towards a wooded area, perhaps 100 yards distant. The weak moonlight revealed an expanse of apparently undisturbed vegetation. No footprints marred the ground. No crushed or bent grass suggested a recent landing. His arms began to tremble, a combination of strained balance and raw nerves. Climbing fully over felt like madness. If something lingered out there, meeting it alone in the encompassing dark was unthinkable. Carefully, he descended, standing once more on the familiar ground of his own yard, staring up at the impassive wall. The footprints on his side terminated with unnerving finality, as if their maker had dissolved into the night air. The question echoed in his mind. How? How could anyone scale that height without aid, without sound? He retrieved the flashlight, sweeping its beam methodically along the base of the wall again, scrutinizing the grass, the nearby tree trunks, the earth itself for any overlooked clue. Nothing. His body felt rigid, his skin prickling with a disquieting blend of fear and bafflement. Silence reclaimed the yard, broken only by the whisper of his own movements. A thorough check seemed necessary. He decided to walk the perimeter one last time. He followed the fence along the left boundary, the light probing the base of each wooden panel. All seemed secure, undisturbed. He traced the back wall again from corner to corner. Only those same, abruptly ending footprints offered any narrative. Then, the right side of the yard, past the dense bushes near the house corner. Everything appeared untouched, save for a scattering of autumn leaves. By the time he reached the porch steps again, he was breathing hard, as if after strenuous exertion. His t-shirt felt damp against his back. He sank onto the top step, the flashlight resting on his thigh, its weight a small comfort. His gaze returned to the sentinel trees, half expecting the aberrant shape to reappear. He listened intently for any betraying crunch of leaf or snap of twig. Only silence answered. He remained there for a quarter of an hour or more, scanning, waiting, his heart rate gradually subsiding, though a fine tremor persisted in his hands. The image of the footprints, their inexplicable terminus at the wall, looped relentlessly in his thoughts. The profound quiet, punctuated only by those few snapped twigs, felt wrong. A human presence, especially barefoot, should have generated more sound, more disturbance. And the motive remained opaque. Why here? Why this silent pilgrimage straight to an insurmountable barrier? With conscious effort, Elias pushed himself to his feet. Inside, he secured the back door, double-checking the lock. He moved through the house, verifying windows, a growing paranoia making him skirt the front ones, imagining unseen eyes watching from the street. He found himself back in the kitchen, leaning against the counter, the flashlight still clutched in his hand. Calling the authorities crossed his mind, but what could he report? A fleeting shadow, footprints leading nowhere. No forced entry, no damage beyond trampled grass. It felt flimsy, insufficient for an emergency call. His phone lay inert on the table. He left it there, the words needed for such a call refusing to form. He poured a glass of water, drank it slowly, the cold liquid shocking against his dry throat. A final compulsion drew him back outside, just to the porch, for one last look. The night had deepened, the moon now veiled by drifting clouds. The air felt distinctly cooler, raising a shiver. Nothing. No movement, no sound disturbed the familiar tableau of his backyard. Yet, the space felt altered, imbued with the memory of the intrusion. His eyes remained fixed on the tree line where the shadow had first appeared. After several more minutes of fruitless vigilance, he retreated inside, locking the door firmly and, contrary to his usual habit, leaving the porch light burning, a small, perhaps futile, beacon against the unknown. He drew the living room blinds closed, feeling the tightness in his chest, noticing his jaw was clenched. Stretching, rolling his neck did little to dispel the persistent unease. Sleep never came. He paced the quiet house until the first hints of gray softened the eastern sky, periodically drawn back to the windows overlooking the yard. The footprints became an obsession, so clearly human, yet defying logical explanation. How could anyone breach that wall without assistance, vanish without a trace? The quietness, the minimal sound, the impossible exit. It felt like a deliberate taunt, a violation of natural law. Around 5:15, as dawn began its slow assertion, he went out one last time, flashlight in hand. The prints remained, stark in the damp earth. He followed them again meticulously, hoping some overlooked detail, some fractional impression near the wall might offer a clue. But everything was precisely as before. The wall stood solid, high, impenetrable. No gap, no rope, no ladder. Intact. Elias never discovered what he saw that night. The shape had the contours of a man, yet moved with an unnatural celerity. The footprints were undeniably real, tangible evidence leading to an impossible conclusion. The incident irrevocably altered his perception of his own small patch of the world. He still seeks solace on the porch occasionally, but the yard lights now blaze through the night, and a motion sensor stands guard near the rear trees, meager defenses against something so inexplicable. No solid explanation has ever surfaced, despite endless contemplation. Only the chilling memory persists, the cold air clinging to his skin, the damp yielding earth beneath his knees, the stark clarity of the footprints, and the silent, solid wall that marked their impossible end. The recollection still triggers that same visceral jolt of adrenaline. Life continues, but now, stepping onto the porch after dark, Elias keeps his eyes wide open, forever scanning the shadows. Dusk was already bleeding into the bruised afternoon sky when I reached the outskirts of the hamlet. No soul stirred the dust of the single track leading inward. Silence reigned, thick and absolute. Structures of time-worn stone huddled together, their facades punctuated by ancient wooden doors and heavy, forbidding shutters. The modern world felt lifetimes away. No automobiles marred the path. No street lamps offered solace against the encroaching gloom. A raw chill permeated the air, carrying the scent of damp earth. And beyond the crooked rooftops, the stark silhouettes of hills clawed at the fading light. Bone-weary from the pilgrimage on foot, bearing only a meager rucksack, a change of clothes, a torch, the last dregs of water. My singular need was sanctuary for the night. One dwelling, seemingly more forsaken than the rest, drew my eye. Its walls, a mosaic of rough-hewn rock, slumped slightly, guarding a low, planked door. Windows, like vacant eyes, were sunk deep within the masonry, their glass warped and uneven. Hesitantly, I tested the door. It yielded with a groan, releasing a breath of cold air thick with the miasma of damp stone and generations of settled dust. Inside lay a single chamber, starkly furnished. A crude table, one solitary chair, a small, soot-stained fireplace. A narrow, twisting stairwell ascended into shadow. I climbed, my boots protesting on the worn treads. The upper room offered little more. A narrow bed frame bearing a thin, lumpy mattress, a squat wooden chest, and a single window gazing out towards the oppressive hills. A simple iron latch secured the door. Uneven floorboards sighed and complained beneath my weight. A quick inspection confirmed the mattress was blessedly dry. Unburdening myself, I placed my few belongings upon the chest, resolving to rest here just until morning light broke the spell of this place. As the last vestiges of sun relinquished their hold, a wind began to keen, infiltrating the room through minuscule gaps in the window frame, its chill deepening perceptibly. Seated on the edge of the rudimentary bed, I peered out. The moon, unexpectedly luminous, cast the terrain in skeletal relief. Near a cluster of darkened houses, indistinct shapes coalesced. Figures, seemingly human, stood sentinel still, motionless. I strained my eyes against the gloom, seeking definition, a face, a distinguishing feature, but found none. They were merely upright shadows against the landscape. After a protracted moment of observation, I turned my gaze inward towards the rough stone wall. When my eyes returned to the window, the space where they had stood was empty. Night fell utterly. Darkness swallowed the room whole. Igniting my torch, I cast its beam towards the door, verifying the latch. Solid enough, it seemed. Yet the wind had gathered force, now battering the window with petulant fury. The glass trembled. The wooden frame groaned under the assault, emitting sounds like stressed timber on the verge of splintering. Seeking a sliver of control, I wedged the room's lone chair beneath the door handle. An amorphous disquiet settled upon me. No voices drifted on the wind, no footfalls echoed from the lane below, only the gale's relentless howl. Then, a new sound threaded through the wind's cry, low and insidious, originating just outside the window. Not speech, but a faint, vibrational humming. Extinguishing the torch, I pressed closer to the glass. Shapes undulated in the pallid moonlight, several of them swaying with a slow, deliberate rhythm, their limbs tracing languid arcs in the darkness. I leaned in, desperate to discern their features, and then I saw their eyes, orbs of flat, startling white, devoid of pupils, fixed directly upon me. A visceral recoil sent me stumbling back from the window, heart hammering against my ribs. I gripped the sill, knuckles white, forcing a ragged breath into constricted lungs. Though no distinct words reached me, an unnerving certainty settled. They were chanting. The sound, too faint, too alien for language, resonated not in my ears, but in the very air, a subsonic thrum. The wind slammed against the window again, a physical blow. The glass shivered violently. I feared it would shatter. My gaze dropped to the floor beneath my feet, to the ancient, uneven planks. Was that a vibration? A subtle something beneath the wood? Crouching, I pressed my ear against the rough timber. Faint, yes, but undeniably present. A scraping, a dragging sound from the space below. Not the frantic scrabbling of rodents, but something heavier, more methodical. I straightened, casting a wary glance at the door. The chair remained wedged, the latch held firm. Yet the thought of opening it, of confronting the absolute darkness of the stairwell below, was paralyzing. What waited beyond? My torch beam sliced through the gloom, inspecting the room's barren corners. Bare stone walls offered no comfort. The chest at the foot of the bed appeared solid. Lifting the lid revealed only a folded, threadbare blanket in a small, empty metal box. I retrieved the blanket, draping it over the thin mattress, a futile gesture against the encroaching chill and dread. Listening intently, I strained to parse the sounds. Outside, the wind's fury, and that persistent, vibrational humming, rising and falling without ever resolving into sense. Inside, the arthritic creaks of old wood. The bed frame beneath me quivered slightly, a tremor originating not from the wind, but from below, transmitted through the very floor. Pushing aside a corner of the thin rug covering the boards revealed it. One plank sat looser than its neighbors. I pressed down. It resisted, stubbornly seated. Pulling harder risked noise, an unwelcome announcement of my presence. Through the window the silhouettes remained, closer now perhaps. They swayed perpetually, torsos angled towards my prison. Their eyes, those blank white discs, never blinked. I watched, mesmerized and repulsed, as their heads tilted in eerie synchrony with their rocking motion. A tentative tap of my finger against the glass elicited no reaction. They continued their silent, rhythmic sway, their soundless hum. Were their mouths moving? Impossible to tell in the shifting moonlight, only stark outlines in those luminous, empty eyes. A sudden, peculiar pressure built within my ears, as if the very atmosphere had thickened. Simultaneously, the sound beneath the floor intensified. evolving into a distinct scraping punctuated by a low, grinding noise. Retreating instinctively, I pressed myself against the cold stone of the far wall, clutching my torch like a talisman, its beam aimed downwards. The floorboards trembled visibly. Fine dust motes danced in the cone of light, disturbed from the cracks between the planks. My heart pounded a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Escape beckoned, yet the path was fraught. Were those figures only outside the window, or did they flank the door as well? Stealing towards the landing door, I pressed my ear against the wood. Silence from the stairwell, save for the house's own groans and the persistent grating from beneath my feet. Slowly, cautiously, I lifted the latch, eased the chair away, and opened the door a mere crack. The hallway gaped, an abyss leading down into impenetrable blackness. Holding the torch low, its beam swallowed by the dark, I descended the uneven steps. Downstairs, the main room felt colder still, utterly vacant. The torchlight swept across the familiar table and chair, unchanged. The hearth remained a black maw. I moved to the main entrance, the heavy wooden door that promised egress. Closed. I grasped the handle, turned. Nothing. Pulled harder. Immovable. Pushed. Futile. Directing the beam along the door's edges revealed the cause. The seams were choked, sealed fast with a substance resembling dried, hardened mud. My fingernails scraped uselessly against its obdurate surface. I possessed no tool adequate to breach it. A sharp crack echoed from upstairs, wood splintering. Heart leaping, I scrambled back up the narrow stairs and burst into the room. The loose floorboard had risen further, creating a definite gap. Something was actively pushing from the void below. The glint of pale wood, or perhaps something else. I thrust the torch beam into the opening. Darkness met the light, but not before I glimpsed something pale and slick, retreating instantly from the illumination. I backed away, keeping the light trained on the gap, my hand trembling. A dry rasp filled my mouth. Beneath the floor, a shuffling sound commenced, moving towards the wall, then circling the perimeter of the room with insistent scraping and tapping. With a grunt of effort, I dragged the heavy wooden chest over the compromised floorboard, hoping to block the intrusion. The chest's passage across the floor screeched, a sound loud enough to make me freeze, listening. The subterranean noise paused momentarily, then resumed its unnerving circuit, scraping along the room's edges. Outside, the humming intensified, no longer just a vibration in the air, but a palpable pressure inside my skull. Gripping the torch, I stared, transfixed, at the window. The silhouettes were pressed against the wall now, mere inches from the glass. Their blank eyes bored directly into the room. Still no discernible mouth movements, yet the humming felt clearer, more purposeful. I fought the urge to meet their gaze, unnerved by the faint luminescence emanating from those white orbs. The wind shrieked, and the window seemed poised to implode at any second. A sudden, violent yank from below. The chest slid inches across the floor. I threw my weight against it, planting my foot firmly, but it shifted again, scraping protestingly. Whatever resided beneath the floor possessed alarming strength. The floorboards groaned, emitting sharp cracking sounds. Frantically, I scanned the room for additional weight. The bed, too light. The chair, insignificant. Leaving the room again, pointless. The sealed door downstairs, the unknown layout of the rest of this stone trap. The entire structure felt hermetically sealed. A tomb. Leaning onto the chest with every ounce of strength I possessed, I felt the vibrations travel up my arms, into my core. My heart hammered. Breath came in ragged gasps. Then, the tapping began. On the window. Soft at first, then more insistent, like skeletal fingernails drumming on the glass. Small, star-shaped cracks radiated outwards from the points of impact. I shone the torch beam directly at them. The tapping figures recoiled slightly, momentarily deterred, but they did not leave. The rhythm resumed, slow, steady, testing the fragile barrier. Crack! The floorboard beneath the chest finally yielded. I stumbled back as the chest tilted precariously. From the widened gap, a long, thin object snaked upwards. Grayish, rough-textured, like a desiccated limb or a gnarled piece of ancient wood. It twisted, probing, scraping against the side of the chest. Reacting purely on instinct, I kicked out. My boot connected solidly. The object jerked back violently, vanishing beneath the floor. A final, receding scrape echoed, then silence from below. I fought to regain my breath, chest tight, sweat beading on my forehead. Outside, the assault on the window resumed. A sharp impact, and a small shard of glass tinkled onto the floor inside. A tiny aperture now existed. Cold, night air streamed in. Through the hole I saw it, a single, pale eye, peering intently. I recoiled, raising the torch defensively. Shining the beam directly into the eye caused the shape outside to flinch, pulling back from the opening. The light, it bothered them. A fragile weapon. I kept the beam trained on the window, a trembling circle of defiance. Beneath the floor, the scraping shifted towards a corner, followed by a dull thud. Then, nothing. Silence from below. I remained standing, torch aimed steadfastly at the window, waiting. The humming outside persisted, an unending, voiceless chorus. The silhouette swayed, keeping a cautious distance from the small breach in the glass, tapping instead on the wooden frame, probing its strength. I kept the light fixed upon them, forcing their retreat. How long would the torch batteries last? The thought, insidious and unwelcome, slithered into my mind. I pushed it away. The wind howled. Roof beams overhead groaned under the strain. Dust sifted down from the ceiling. Focus. Vigilance. Sleep was an impossibility. Pacing the confines of the small room, I periodically checked the gap in the floor, illuminating it with the torch. Nothing emerged, though the chest remained slightly askew over the broken board. My legs ached with fatigue, but sitting felt like surrender. The night stretched on, an eternity punctuated by the tapping on the window frame, the memory of scraping beneath my feet, and the ceaseless, maddening hum. My heart raced, my breathing remained shallow and fast. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the quality of the darkness outside began to shift. A subtle dilution, a lessening of the absolute black. The wind, though still potent, seemed to carry a different note. Through the window, I saw the silhouettes draw back, melting into the deeper shadows clustered around the neighboring houses. Their humming faded, diminishing like a receding tide. I watched them retreat, step by deliberate step, until the space immediately outside the window was empty once more. The tapping ceased. Under the floor, a final, faint scrape resonated. Then profound silence descended, broken only by the wind's lonely whistle through the structure's numerous cracks. Approaching the window cautiously, I peered out. Empty space greeted me, framed by the stark outlines of stone dwellings under a lightning sky. The figures were gone. Only the wind remained. Hope, fragile but persistent, spurred me towards the downstairs door. Descending into the cold main room, I examined the seal again. Using a splintered leg broken from the upstairs chair as a makeshift chisel, I began chipping away at the hardened mud-like substance. Minutes stretched into an eternity of scraping and prying. Finally, something gave. The latch clicked. With a surge of adrenaline, I pulled the heavy door inward. Cold, clean morning air rushed to meet me, a blessed relief. The narrow street lay deserted, silent under the dawn's gray light. No figures lurked, no pale eyes watched, no humming vibrated in the air. Stepping over the threshold, I left the house and its horrors behind, the open sky a welcome canopy. I walked away quickly, resolutely not looking back at the window with its broken pane, nor thinking of the violated floorboards within. Onward, until the last stone structure of the forsaken village dwindled behind me. The place remained, a silent testament of weathered stone and lingering dread, but I would not spend another night within its grasp. I kept moving, putting distance between myself and the silence that screamed. It wasn't coincidence, not when the machine tailing Alara wore her own car's skin. A perfect mimicry blooming in the rear view, and with it, the certainty that this night was a tear in the fabric of reality, a plunge into waking nightmare. Her grip tightened on the steering wheel, knuckles bleached bone white, a premonition solidifying. The hours ahead would unravel her. Merely minutes ago, it was just another closing shift bled dry at the Starlight Grill. 2:17. Glowed accusingly from the dash as Alara eased the sedan from the desolate lot, the neon promise of always open shrinking behind her like a fading ember. Asphalt arteries of the sleeping town lay vacant, veins usually pulsing with life now still under the moonless shroud. A familiar transit etched into muscle memory, yet tonight the air crackled, thick with an unseen static that prickled the hairs on her arms. 10 minutes dissolved into the encroaching dark before the headlights materialized, twin stars pinned to her rear view. It held its distance, a patient satellite orbiting her solitary world. Innocuous, perhaps. Another soul navigating the nocturnal void. But as Alara threaded the sedan through the labyrinth of slumbering side streets, the follower clung, an unwelcome shadow. A glance back revealed only blinding glare, concealing the occupant behind a veil of light and anonymity. Unease coiled low in her stomach. Time to dissect this paranoia. At the junction where home beckoned left, Alara veered right, a deliberate deviation onto Coulter Lane. The headlights swung in perfect synchrony. Her pulse leaped, a frantic drum against her ribs. Calm. A whisper against mountain panic. Lost, maybe. Using you as a guide. A flimsy shield against the chilling certainty blooming in her gut. This was pursuit, calculated and cold. Another turn, arbitrary, desperate, onto Hemlock Drive. The shadow mirrored her flawlessly. Sweat slicked her palms. The air in the cabin grew thin, stolen by tightening anxiety. Then, clarity struck, colder than the night air rushing through the vents. Not just similar, identical. Her own weary graphite sedan, replicated down to the last detail. Same make, same model. And there, catching the phantom gleam of her own taillights, the crescent scar on the front bumper, a memento from a careless encounter with a parking bollard last spring. Impossible. The word was a choked gasp, lost in the sudden roaring in her ears. Her foot found the accelerator, a desperate surge for distance. The duplicate matched her acceleration without effort, a ghost tethered by an unseen cord. She braked sharply. It braked in perfect time. A mirror image pulled from the glass and given terrifying, three-dimensional life. Was this delusion, a fatigue-induced phantasm born from exhaustion and stale coffee? Had sleep claimed her at the wheel, casting her into this automotive horror show? Or something infinitely stranger, clawing its way from beyond reason? Her fingers scrabbled for her phone, a lifeline clutched in trembling hands. The screen flared, then displayed only mocking bars of emptiness. Dead air. No signal out here. Of course. Time fractured into a kaleidoscope of adrenaline and raw fear. Ilara drove blind, instinct wrestling with terror, yanking the wheel down unfamiliar lanes, each turn a gamble against the relentless echo in her mirror. The phantom twin remained tethered, an inescapable fact. Streetlights dwindled, surrendering the world to a deeper, more profound blackness on the town's ragged edge. Only their twin headlight beams sliced the oppressive dark, twin scalpels dissecting the night. Ahead, a silhouette clawed itself from the gloom. A derelict petrol station, skeletal and forgotten. Its faded signage whispered of bygone eras, boarded windows like vacant eyes staring into the void. Sanctuary, however temporary. Ilara wrenched the wheel, tires screaming protest on the fractured tarmac. Engines silenced, lights extinguished. She plunged into artificial darkness, shrinking down, holding her breath against the hammering in her chest. Silence reigned for a heartbeat, thick and expectant. Then, the crunch of gravel under other tires. The duplicate rolled in, its engine dying beside hers with unnerving precision. Stillness was a prayer. She dared not exhale as car doors clicked open, then shut. Footsteps scuffed the gritty earth, drawing inexorably closer. Her own heartbeat felt deafening, a betrayal in the suffocating quiet. A shadow fell across the driver's side glass, eclipsing the faint starlight. With agonizing slowness, dread coiling in her stomach like a cold serpent, Ilara lifted her gaze and met her own eyes. A perfect reflection, standing solid in the night air. Same tangled auburn hair escaping its braid. Same scattering of freckles across the bridge of her nose. The faint silver line of a scar bisecting her left eyebrow from a childhood fall. But the expression, that was alien. A smile stretched across the familiar features, yet utterly devoid of warmth, sharp and predatory. A rictus of glacial amusement. Time stretched thin between them, a taut wire humming with terror. Then, a deliberate, slow lift of a hand identical to her own. A single, sharp tap against the window pane. The sound cracking the fragile silence like a bone. Raw terror detonated within her. Keys trembled violently in her grasp, fumbling, refusing the ignition's embrace. The figure outside remained motionless, observing her frantic struggle with that chilling, knowing smirk. Finally, the engine roared unwillingly to life. Ilara slammed the gear shift, tires spitting gravel as she launched the sedan back onto the empty road. fleeing like prey flushed from cover. A glance, reflexive, unavoidable, into the mirror confirmed the impossible horror. Her car, her face behind the wheel, clung relentlessly behind. How long did she race through the unspooling darkness? Time warped, became elastic. The landscape smeared past, an abstract canvas of night and velocity. The fuel needle dipped perilously low, the warning light a pulsing crimson eye on the dash, mirroring the frantic beat of her heart. Just as despair began to crystallize, a beacon emerged from the void, a weathered sign declaring, "Welcome to Oakhaven. Population, 2,200. Habitation, light, people." Hope surged, fragile but fierce. She urged the sputtering car onward, praying it wouldn't die now. Crossing the town line felt like breaching an invisible barrier. Another glance back. The highway stretched vacant and black behind her. A choked sob escaped her lips, relief washing over her in a dizzying, nauseating wave. She coasted into the brightly lit sanctuary of an all-night diner lot, the engine shuddering into silence. For long moments, Alara simply sat, the tremors slowly subsiding, the silence now a balm after the engine's frantic whine. Gathering frayed nerves, she exited the car, the cool night air sharp against her feverish skin. Towards the glass door she walked, legs unsteady, craving warmth, coffee, sanity. A flicker in the polished window pane snagged her attention. She spun, ice flooding her veins. Across the asphalt expanse stood her Ford sedan. Lounging against its flank, bathed in the diner's fluorescent glow, was her double. It lifted a hand, fingers splayed in a casual, mocking salute, the terrible smile firmly in place. Alara stumbled back, colliding with the diner door, the impact jarring her teeth. A blink, a gasp, and the lot was empty save for her own vehicle, silent under the artificial lights. She tumbled inside, the bell above the door jangling discordantly. A weary-eyed waitress, Martha according to her plastic name tag, looked up from polishing the counter, her expression shifting to concern. "Everything all right there, sugar? You look like you've seen a ghost." Alara opened her mouth, the impossible story clawing its way up her throat. The identical car, the face, the chase. But the words died. Who would believe such madness? It sounded like a fever dream. "Fine," she croaked, the single word rough as sandpaper. She slid onto a cracked vinyl stool. "Just a long night. Coffee, please. Black." As Martha turned to the ancient percolator, Alara caught her own image mirrored in the gleaming chrome countertop. Her face stared back. Familiar, yet. Was the curve of her lips subtly altered now? Did a flicker of something cold and knowing reside deep within her own reflected eyes? The coffee arrived, hot and bitter, but the tremor in her hands persisted. This ordeal hadn't ended at the Oakhaven town line. It had merely shifted its nature, become insidious. The entity that wore her face, that drove her car, was still out there, an untethered reflection loosed upon the world. And worse, a terrifying thought began to bloom. Perhaps a sliver of its chilling wrongness had followed her, lodged itself within her own reflection, a seed of doubt planted deep in her soul. Oakhaven wasn't sanctuary. It was just another stage in a play she didn't understand. Home was lost to her now, tainted by the memory, by the possibility of return. Because somewhere, under the same indifferent sky, her perfect, predatory double existed, patiently waiting, intent on claiming the life that was rightfully Alara's. And she felt, with a certainty that chilled her more profoundly than the night air or the lukewarm coffee, that it would never, ever stop its pursuit. He first registered as a tremor in the landscape of my Tuesday. Nothing overt, merely a face swimming into view behind a pane of glass as I walked the familiar path to my car. Yet, something in the sheer, unblinking focus of his gaze snagged my attention. A brief pause in the rhythm of my afternoon. Dismissing it as fatigue, a mind prone to weaving narratives from shadows, I continued on. How could I have known that fleeting image was the seed of a slow, creeping dread, destined to consume the quiet corners of my world? My name is Maya. For 6 months, this enclave of manicured lawns and synchronized sprinkler systems had been my refuge. A place where curb appeal was paramount and whispers disseminated with startling velocity. It offered a stark, almost unnerving tranquility after years navigating the city's relentless pulse. Mostly, I courted solitude, content in the borrowed peace. The man behind the glass, it transpired, occupied the house adjacent to mine. Vague impressions had preceded that Tuesday sighting. Middle-aged, perhaps cresting 50, his hair receding from a perpetually furrowed brow. Our interactions were confined to the briefest, most perfunctory nods exchanged across the invisible boundary of our properties. His name remained a mystery, but after that day, his presence began to etch itself onto my awareness. It began subtly, like a shift in barometric pressure. I'd be kneeling in the dirt, coaxing life into flower beds, and feel a prickling sensation on my neck, the undeniable weight of observation. A glance towards his house would reveal only the swift retreat of a silhouette from a window frame. Retrieving mail became an exercise in peripheral vigilance, his sudden materialization on his porch, that same unwavering stare fixed upon me, becoming unnervingly frequent. I spun justifications, loneliness perhaps, or simple curiosity about the newcomer. Yet, as days bled into weeks, the sensation of being watched intensified, clinging like damp air. One twilight, nearly a week after the initial window incident, I was wrestling with the recycling bin when his voice sliced through the evening calm. Splendid evening, isn't it? I startled, a jolt running through me. He stood poised at the edge of his lawn, hands plunged deep into his pockets, a smile affixed to his face that failed to ignite any warmth in his eyes. Yes. Lovely, I managed, the words catching in my throat, ambushed by the proximity. Silas, he offered, closing the small distance between us with a single step. I don't believe we've had a formal introduction. A reciprocal smile felt like a mask I had to force onto my features, the internal clang of alarm bells refusing to be silenced. Maya, it's nice to meet you. Minutes unfurled in the sterile currency of small talk, the predictability of the weather, the quietude of the neighborhood, but a discordant note hummed beneath the surface. His gaze remained tethered to me, relentless, even when my own averted, seeming to catalog every nuance, The fabric of my shirt, the nervous twist of a lock of hair between my fingers. Excusing myself felt like escaping a magnetic field. Back within the sanctuary of my walls, the unease lingered. I methodically checked each lock that night, my gaze drawn irresistibly to the window, only to find Silas still stationed in his yard, a motionless sentinel staring towards my house in the gathering dark. In the days that followed, Silas's presence became an inescapable counterpoint to my own routines. His activities seemed unnervingly synchronized with mine. My departure for work coincided with his retrieval of the morning paper. My return home aligned with his meticulous watering of identical shrubs. Always there, always watching. I began to deliberately fracture my schedule, leaving earlier, returning later, tracing different routes through the labyrinthine streets. Yet somehow, his awareness persisted. One dawn, departing a full hour ahead of my usual time, I discovered Silas already beside his car, bonnet raised, tinkering with the engine. "Engine trouble?" I inquired, striving for an air of nonchalance. He glanced up, the unsettling smile instantly in place. No. Just a bit of routine upkeep. You're out and about bright and early." The observation, innocuous on its surface, landed like ice against my skin. How could he possibly discern this deviation from my norm? Weeks dissolved, and Silas's intrusions shifted from passive observation to subtle interference. I'd return to find my patio cushions rearranged in unfamiliar patterns, or blooms I hadn't planted inexplicably sprouting in my garden beds. Once, pulling into the driveway, a flicker of movement behind my own living room curtain sent a jolt of adrenaline through me, but a frantic search revealed nothing disturbed, no trace of entry. Paranoia began to whisper insidious doubts. Was I fabricating this? Misinterpreting the actions of a neighbor who was merely peculiar, perhaps overly solicitous. Then came the night that shattered all rationalization, confirming the chilling reality of my fears. 3 a.m. jolted me from sleep. A sound from downstairs, sharp against the house's nocturnal sighs. Initially dismissed as the groan of settling timbers, it repeated. A distinct, localized creak, the unmistakable protest of the loose floorboard in the hallway. Heart hammering against my ribs, I groped for my phone on the nightstand, only to find the screen dark, lifeless. I distinctly recalled plugging it into the charger before succumbing to sleep. Panic, cold and sharp, constricted my throat. I slid silently from bed, bare feet finding the cool floor, and crept towards my bedroom door. The hallway stretched before me, a corridor of impenetrable shadow, but at the base of the stairs, a deeper darkness shifted, coalesced into a vaguely human form. Someone was inside my house. Retreating into the relative safety of my room, my hands scrabbled frantically for anything that might serve as a weapon. My fingers closed around the cool, heavy base of a desk lamp. With trembling hands, I yanked its cord from the wall socket. Footsteps ascended the stairs now. Measured, deliberate, each tread echoing in the suffocating silence. I flattened myself behind the door, lamp hefted high, my body a taut wire of adrenaline and terror. The steps paused directly outside my room. I held my breath, every muscle coiled, anticipating the violation. Slowly, the doorknob began to turn. As the door swung inward, I brought the lamp down in a desperate, arcing blow. A sickening thud reverberated, followed by a low grunt of pain. The figure staggered back, clutching his head, and in the faint moonlight filtering through the window, I saw his face. Silas. "What in God's name are you doing in my house?" I shrieked, the lamp still brandished, a fragile shield against the horror. Blood seeped between the fingers pressed to his temple, but the expression contorting his features wasn't anger, nor even pain. It was a terrifying, manic exhilaration. "Oh, Maya," he breathed, his voice unnervingly serene, almost conversational. "I've been in your house many times. I know all about you. How you prefer your coffee brewed strong in the mornings. The novel you're currently reading, page 94, if I recall. The scent of the lavender lotion you smooth onto your skin before sleep." Nausea churned within me. Every dismissed anomaly, every flicker of doubt, every instance I'd questioned my own sanity, it was all real. He hadn't just been watching. He'd been here, moving through my private spaces, absorbing the intimate textures of my life. "Get out," I commanded, my voice ragged but finding a core of fury. "Get out right now, or I swear I'll call the police." Silas's smile stretched wider, a predatory curve. "Go on then. Make the call. Tell them about your friendly neighbor, just keeping a watchful eye. They'll dismiss you as hysterical." But even as the words left his lips, his eyes flickered past me, snagging on something in the room's deeper shadows. Following his gaze, my own eyes landed on it. The small surveillance camera I'd positioned on my bookshelf days earlier, a desperate measure born of escalating unease. He saw the dawning comprehension on my face, and the smug certainty in his expression fractured. "You recorded this," he whispered, the question low, imbued with a sudden, venomous chill. I nodded, tightening my grip on the lamp's base. "Every single second. Now leave my house before I present the authorities with undeniable proof of just how friendly you've truly been." For a taut moment, violence simmered in the air. His hands clenched into fists. He took a menacing half-step towards me. Then abruptly, as if a switch had been flipped, he spun on his heel and plunged back down the stairs. The slam of the front door echoed through the violated silence. Sleep was an impossibility that night. I remained huddled against the bedroom door, lamp clutched tight, every creak and sigh of the house triggering a fresh wave of terror. With the first pale light of dawn, I called the police. They responded with swift efficiency. I showed them the footage. Silas's house stood empty next door. He had vanished into the night. But what the officers discovered within its walls turned my blood to ice. An entire room consecrated to me. Walls papered with photographs, hundreds upon hundreds, capturing me at work, navigating grocery aisles, even within the presumed sanctuary of my own home. Stacks of printouts detailed my emails. Transcripts documented my private text messages. A calendar meticulously charted the rhythms of my daily existence. The police gathered it all, boxing up the chilling evidence of his obsession. They offered reassurances, promises of apprehension, declarations of my newfound safety. But but standing amidst that disturbing gallery, the shrine erected to his fixation, I knew safety was a concept I might never truly reclaim. Within the week, I moved. Staying in the house, so thoroughly permeated by his presence, felt unbearable. I obtained a new phone number, abandoned my email address, even altered the color of my hair. My new apartment boasts a formidable security system, and I began the arduous process of unpacking the trauma with a therapist. Yet now, months removed, the phantom sensation of being watched persists. A ghost limb of fear. A curtain twitching in a window across the street. A car idling too long at the curb. Each sends my pulse into frantic overdrive. Checking locks has become a ritual. Routine a dangerous liability. I constantly disrupt. Because the chilling certainty remains. Silas is still out there. And the question haunts my waking hours and troubled sleep. Does his obsessive gaze remain fixed on me? Or has he found another unsuspecting soul upon whom to inflict this creepy nightmare? The thought coils, cold and venomous, in my gut, prompting the perverse hope that his focus hasn't shifted. Because the alternative, imagining him beginning this terrifying cycle anew, weaving his dread into someone else's life, is a horror too profound to truly contemplate. So I remain vigilant, perpetually scanning the periphery, forever poised. I learned, in the cruelest way imaginable, that the monster doesn't always lurk in the shadows or beneath the bed. Sometimes he resides just next door, concealed behind the thinnest veneer of neighborly cordiality. And he watches. Always he watches. The hinges groaned, a rusted lament, as the door surrendered to Ronan's shove, peeling back to expose a gullet of shadow, choked with the ghosts of industry. We stepped across the threshold, and the air inside, thick and stagnant, clung to us. A miasma of damp decay and irretrievable moments. None of us grasped then that this trespass into dereliction was a descent into a darkness far more tangible, more predatory than mere forgotten corners. My name is Elias. What follows is the wreckage of memory. How one night's quest for novelty among friends curdled into a persistent nightmare. It was meant to be nothing more than a deviation, a Saturday night unbound from the usual haunts with my circle, Ronan, Clara, and Leo. We were adrift in our early 20s, weary of the predictable rhythm of weekend congregations, hungry for something visceral. Ronan, ever the catalyst, proposed the forsaken riverside industrial sprawl festering on the city's fringe. Deserted for decades, they say, he'd offered, a reckless spark kindling in his eyes. Imagine the relics inside, the stories. The allure was potent, the illicit thrill of forbidden territory, a siren call we couldn't ignore. So, equipped with little more than torchlights and an ill-advised surplus of bravado, we ventured out as the twilight bled across the sky. The complex loomed, skeletal and immense, a monument to a bygone era of soot and steel. Chain link ravaged by time and rust sagged around its perimeter, crowned with barbed wire like a thorny wreath. Finding a breach, a ragged tear likely created by previous pilgrims of ruin, proved unnervingly simple. Slipping through the gap, an involuntary tremor traced my spine. The structures towered, their shattered window panes like vacant orbits fixed upon us. A flicker of doubt surfaced. Are we absolutely certain about question felt small, swallowed by the brooding silence. "Don't falter now, Elias," Leo chided, his grin a flash in the gloom. "Where's that spirit of discovery?" I quelled the rising apprehension and trailed them toward the largest edifice. Its main entrance was sealed, planks nailed crudely across, but a smaller side door yielded, groaning under Ronan's determined pressure. Inside unfurled a labyrinth of dormant machinery, conveyor belts arrested mid-motion, and drifts of indiscernible debris. Our torchlights sliced corridors through the oppressive gloom, illuminating graffiti-scarred walls and the furtive scuttling of unseen creatures. Rats, I desperately hoped. We pushed deeper, our footfalls echoing unnaturally in the cavernous expanse. Clara paused intermittently, capturing the decay, her camera flash momentarily banishing the shadows. "Astounding," she breathed, her voice hushed with a strange reverence. Then came the sound. A sharp, metallic report. The unmistakable clang of heavy metal dropped onto concrete, reverberating from somewhere within the building's depths. We froze, torch beams meeting, eyes wide in the sudden stillness. What was that? My pulse hammered against my ribs. "Just the building settling," Ronan suggested, though his tone lacked conviction. "Place is ancient, bound to make noise." We listened, ears straining against the silence. It came again, closer this time, sharper. Definitely not the random groans of decay. This felt intentional. "We need to leave," Leo urged, his earlier swagger dissolving into palpable unease. But as we pivoted, a chilling realization dawned. In our absorption, we'd navigated too far, the path back dissolving into the indistinguishable maze of rust and shadow. "All right, stay calm," Ronan commanded, affecting a composure he didn't feel. We just backtrack, carefully. Our pace quickened, torch beams now frantic, sweeping the surroundings for any landmark, any signpost back to the known. But the gloom rendered everything homogeneous. More machines, more detritus, more encroaching darkness. The sounds intensified, closer still. Murmured voices, low and indistinct, bled through the walls, punctuated by heavy, rhythmic footsteps. "Down!" Clara hissed, yanking me behind a colossal, inert piece of apparatus. We huddled, stifling our breath as the footsteps drew nearer, louder, finally halting just beyond our flimsy shield. "Know you're in here." A rough voice resonated, amplified by the acoustics. "Show yourselves. Might go easier on you." My heart felt like a trapped bird battering my chest. I glanced at my friends, raw fear mirrored in their faces. "Last call," the voice grated. "Come out, or we come looking. You don't want that." Ronan met our eyes, his face stark white but resolute. He gave a slow nod. Hesitantly, we rose, hands lifted in surrender. 3 figures materialized from the shadows, broad-shouldered men in a dark attire, their faces hard, unyielding. Yet it wasn't merely their intimidating presence that iced my veins. It was the firearms they held loosely, expertly, and behind them, glimpsed in the shifting torchlight, other figures maneuvered large, unmarked crates. "Well, now," the speaker drawled, a humorless smirk carved itself onto his face. Look what the rot dragged in. Kids playing explorer. We're sorry, I managed, my voice trembling. We didn't realize anyone was here. We'll go. We won't say anything. His laugh was hollow, devoid of mirth. Don't think so. You've blundered into something significant. Can't just have you wandering off. The true weight of our transgression crashed down. This wasn't just trespassing. It was interrupting something clandestine, dangerous. These men weren't caretakers or fellow explorers. They had no intention of letting us witness and walk away. What ensued remains a frantic kaleidoscope of terror. Shouts erupted. Gunfire cracked, echoing endlessly. We scattered, propelled by pure panic, desperate for any egress, any sliver of escape. In the chaos, I lost the others. I found myself alone, sprinting through the bewildering geometry of the warehouse, the sounds of pursuit a relentless drumbeat. I ducked into what appeared to be a dilapidated office, lungs searing, desperate for air. And there it was, a window, grime-streaked but intact, large enough. Beyond it, the velvet expanse of night, deliverance. My hands shook violently as I wrestled with the latch. It gave way with a piercing screech. I froze, convinced I'd betrayed my location. But the footsteps I could hear seemed to be receding, not advancing. I was halfway through the opening, the rough sill scraping my skin, when I heard Clara scream, distant, yet utterly distinct. A moment of paralysis seized me. Leave them. But more shouts erupted, closer now, and primal self-preservation surged, eclipsing loyalty. I tumbled out, hitting the packed earth with jarring force. Ignoring the blossoming pain, I scrambled upright and ran until the warehouse was a dark smudge against the horizon, until the distant city lights promised sanctuary, until my legs buckled and I collapsed, gasping, onto familiar pavement. My breathless tail met impassive stares at the station, too lurid, too cinematic. But when Ronan, Clara, and Leo failed to surface, when frantic families filed missing persons reports, disbelief shifted grudgingly to investigation. They combed the Riverside complex meticulously, found nothing. No contraband, no signs of struggle, no trace of my friends. It was as if the night itself had been erased, swallowed by the decaying structure. But I carry the imprint. I know the texture of the fear, the cold purpose in those eyes. I know we disturbed something venomous coiled in the city's forgotten places. And I live with the certainty that Ronan, Clara, and Leo are gone, consumed by that darkness or trapped within a nightmare worse than death. The world outside feels precarious now. Every unexpected sound makes me flinch. Every deep shadow seems poised to disgorge those figures. There are moments I wish I hadn't squeezed through that window, that the guilt wasn't this constant, gnawing companion. But then the terror resurfaces, visceral and chilling, and I understand that surviving wasn't mere chance. It was an obligation. This account is that obligation. A desperate hope that someone, somewhere, will lend credence, will help unravel the truth buried within that industrial tomb. Because the dread persists that what we unearthed was merely a fragment of something vast and malignant. And it's still out there, lurking in the neglected spaces, waiting patiently for the next curious souls to stray too close. The air inside the starlight lantern was wrong, viscous with a tension that snagged in the throat. From the moment the threshold was crossed, every gaze pivoted, sharp with suspicion, tinged perhaps with something colder, fear. A wiser soul would have pivoted too, retreated to the waiting car, devoured the remaining miles, until this forsaken ribbon of asphalt dissolved into faulty memory. But exhaustion gnawed, hunger clawed, and the fuel gauge needle flirted dangerously with empty. So, inertia won. A foundational error. For untold hours, Elias had piloted his vehicle through the swallowing dark, a solitary vessel navigating an ocean of night, bound cross-country toward the promise of a different life. The highway stretched barren, punctuated only by the rhythmic sweep of headlamps briefly illuminating skeletal road signs. Then ahead, a spectral glow materialized against the black canvas, the diner's sign, a fragile haven. The starlight lantern. It pulsed in hesitant crimson script. Always open. He steered onto the crunching gravel of the sparse lot, joining only a weathered pickup and a slumbering 18-wheeler. Killing the engine plunged him into a profound quiet, the silence broken solely by the electric hum of the sign, a sound like distant, anxious insects. A tiny bell, perched above the doorframe, chimed with incongruous brightness as he pushed inside. The interior was a time capsule sealed sometime around mid-century. Booths upholstered in cracked, lamenting vinyl. A Formica countertop scuffed with the ghosts of countless meals. Faded advertisements hawking products long vanished from the world. Occupancy was minimal. A trucker, etched by sun and road, hunched over his mug at the counter, a study in weary solitude. In a booth nearby, a young man and woman murmured with fierce intimacy, their plates untouched monuments to distraction. Behind the counter stood Martha, proprietor and sole waitress, her silvered hair disciplined into a severe bun, her age worn like a durable apron. "Take any seat, sugar," she offered, the warmth in her tone fraying at the edges. He slid onto a squealing vinyl bench. Martha approached, notepad poised, the geography of stress mapped clearly on her face, her eyes executing nervous patrols of the room. "What can I get started for you?" she inquired, the pen hovering. "Coffee, please. Black. And perhaps a menu when you have a moment," Elias replied. She gave a curt nod, turning away. As she filled a thick ceramic mug, a subtle tremor animated her hands. He was formulating a gentle inquiry about her well-being when the bell above the door sang its jarring tune once more. The already strained atmosphere didn't just tighten, it became brittle, electric. Elias turned. A chill, sudden and invasive, traced his spine. 3 figures stood silhouetted against the faint pre-dawn light filtering through the glass door, dark-clad, their expressions carved from stone. The foremost, a tall man bisected by a livid scar running down one cheek, swept the room with eyes like chips of obsidian. When that frigid assessment landed on Elias, the chill deepened. They claimed stools at the counter, a silent occupation. Martha approached them, her movements constrained, almost mechanical. "Evening, Rorik," the scarred man greeted, his voice a low rumble that vibrated with menace. "Noticed you got company tonight." Martha manufactured a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "What'll it be for you, gentlemen?" think you know what we're here for, Rorik countered, leaning slightly across the counter, invading her space. Calendar page turned, didn't it? Her reply was lost to Elias, a muted murmur, but he saw her nod stiffly before vanishing through a swinging door into the back. The trio swiveled their attention outward, their collective gaze washing over the remaining patrons like a predator assessing its terrain. "Evening all," Rorik announced, his tone falsely congenial. "Don't let us interrupt. Just collecting a due." The young couple, Leo and Clara, seemed to fuse together in their booth, seeking refuge in proximity. The trucker, Silas, appeared to physically retract, folding into himself. Elias feigned intense absorption in the laminated menu, his thoughts a frantic scramble. What hornet's nest had he blundered into? Martha reappeared minutes later, clutching a small, plain envelope. She extended it to Rorik. He took it, slid it open with a practiced thumb, and began to sift through the contents. His features incrementally hardened into a mask of displeasure. "This is light, Martha," he growled, the sound grating. The arrangement was clear. "It's been quiet," Martha pleaded, her voice barely audible, thin as thread. "Terribly quiet. I just need a little more grace." Rorik surged to his feet, his shadow falling over her. Grace ran out. Maybe a more tangible reminder is needed. One of his companions rose smoothly and angled toward the kitchen passage. A sharp shattering of glass echoed out, followed immediately by Martha's choked cry. Something fractured within Elias. Perhaps it was the accumulated weariness, the oppressive weight of the diner's fear, or simply the culmination of a lifetime, witnessing quiet cruelties inflicted by the callous. Whatever the catalyst, he was standing before the conscious decision formed. "Hey!" The word ripped out, louder and steadier than he felt. "Leave her out of it." Silence slammed down. Absolute. Rorik pivoted slowly, his eyes narrowing to dangerous slits. "Well now," he purred, the softness in his voice more alarming than any shout. "Look what the night dragged in. A knight-errant." He advanced a single step. Elias resisted the primal urge to recoil. "This ain't your concern, traveler. Best sit back down, finish your coffee, and study that menu some more." Elias swallowed against a suddenly parched throat. "You're making it my business, scaring these folks half to death." A laugh escaped Rorik, harsh and devoid of humor. "Son, you've wandered into waters far deeper than you can swim." Before Elias could form a retort, a new voice entered the fray, rough as gravel. "He ain't wrong," Silas the trucker declared from the counter. "This shakedown's gone on too damn long." Rorik spun towards him. "You keep out of this, old-timer." But the dynamic had irrevocably shifted. Leo and Clara were standing now, moving hesitantly but resolutely to flank Elias. Even Martha straightened, a flicker of defiance rekindling in her tired eyes. Rorik's gaze darted around the small room, absorbing the sudden, unexpected united front. His two companions shifted their weight, unease radiating from them. "You're making a mistake," Rorik snarled, his voice thick with impotent fury. "A big one. Every single one of you. We'll be back. You'll see." With a final venomous glare, they turned and pushed through the door, the bell jangling a frantic, angry farewell as it slammed shut behind them. For a stretched second, stillness reigned. Then Martha dissolved into tears, the dam of suppressed terror finally breaching. Silas moved to her side, offering a gruff, comforting presence. Leo and Clara leaned against each other, exhaling simultaneously in shared relief. "Thank you," Martha managed between sobs, dabbing at her eyes. "You have no idea." Over the ensuing hour, lubricated by fresh, strong coffee and unexpected slices of Martha's surprisingly excellent apple pie, the full narrative unfolded. Rorik and his crew were local parasites, bleeding businesses dry along this desolate highway, stretched for years. Fear of reprisal had kept everyone silent, compliant. "But you," Silas said, his hand landing firmly on Elias's shoulder. "You lit the fuse. Showed us maybe we didn't have to just take it." As the blackness outside began to pale, yielding to the first hints of dawn, others drifted into the diner, regulars, neighbors. News, it seemed, traveled fast even on lonely highways. A fragile optimism permeated the room, a shared sense that the established dread might, just possibly, be fractured. When Elias finally rose to leave, the sun painting the horizon in tentative strokes of rose and gold, Martha waved away his attempt to pay. Leo and Clara pressed a slip of paper with their numbers into his hand. "If you're ever back this way." As he pulled the car back onto the highway, Martha's wave was visible in the rearview mirror. He returned the gesture, an unexpected thickness in his throat. He never did pass through that particular stretch of nowhere again. The new job consumed him. Life propelled him forward. Yet the memory of that night surfaces often. Martha's resilience, Silas's gruff courage, the quiet solidarity of Leo and Clara. He wonders if the change held, if that single spark of collective bravery ignited a lasting resistance against the shadow Rorik cast. He hopes so. He hopes that their stand mattered beyond that single, charged moment. Because that's the potent truth about confronting bullies. Sometimes one person's unexpected courage can unlock the bravery dormant in others. And occasionally, late at night on some endless drive, the distant luminescence of a roadside diner will catch his eye. The thought of pulling over, of stepping into another potential crucible, flickers. He never does. Fortune rarely repeats such dramatic favors, but he allows himself a small smile, remembering the starlight lantern, remembering that the most profound shifts can originate in the humblest of settings. And he drives on, carrying the weight and warmth of the night. He inadvertently became part of a small town's quiet revolution.